CBS News ran a headline not long ago that made a lot of people stop scrolling. It said something like, 90% of Americans are ignoring the #1 piece of Social Security advice from financial experts. 90%. And when you read that, the implication is pretty clear. 90% of people are making a mistake. They're being irrational. They need to be corrected. But here's what that headline didn't tell you. Only about 4% to 8% of Americans actually wait until age 70 to claim Social Security. So when experts say, wait as long as you can, they're describing a strategy that almost nobody follows, and then acting surprised. I'm not here to tell you what you should do. Honestly, no spreadsheet understands the pressure of looking at your bills on a Monday night and wondering if you can hold out another year. That's real. That's a weight that doesn't show up in any retirement calculator. But before you decide whether to join that 90%, there's a number the headlines consistently leave out. 77%. If you claim Social Security at 62 versus waiting until 70, you are leaving 77% more monthly income on the table every month for the rest of your life. That's not a rounding error. That's a different retirement. Now, does that mean everyone should wait? No. But it does mean the conversation is more complicated than claim early and invest the difference, which is advice that sounds clean in a podcast, but falls apart when you actually look at what happens to that money in real life. So in this video, we're going to look at the math that most people skip, the tax trap that makes the wait until 70 strategy backfire for a lot of middle-income households, and why the behavioral psychology of early claiming is working against most of the people who choose it. Not because they made a dumb decision, but because they were never shown the full picture. Let's start with how this actually works, because most explanations skip the part that matters. Social Security has 3 claiming ages that change everything. If you claim at 62, you receive roughly 70% of your full benefit. If you wait until your full retirement age, which for most people reading this is 67, you get 100%. And if you keep waiting past 67, your benefit grows by 8% for every year you delay, up until age 70. That 8% is called the delayed retirement credit, and it's guaranteed, not market dependent, not subject to sequence risk, just 8% per year, automatically, backed by the federal government. So let's put a real person in this. Mark is 62. He's been offered $1,400 a month if he claims Social Security today. His advisor runs the numbers and tells him, if he waits until 70, that same benefit becomes $2,480 a month. That's not a small difference. That's $1,080 more every single month, inflation adjusted, for as long as he lives. Now, wanting to take the $1,400 right now is not impatient. It is not a failure of planning. Mark worked for decades. He's earned it. And there are real, legitimate reasons someone in his position might need that income today. A mortgage that isn't paid off, a spouse who stopped working, a health situation that makes the future uncertain. The desire to take what's yours, when you can get it, makes complete sense. But here's what the decision actually involves. When Mark takes $1,400 at 62, he is trading a lifetime income floor, one that adjusts for inflation every year, for cash flow right now. The question isn't just which number is bigger. The question is, what is the cost of that floor if you give it up? Because Social Security isn't a savings account. It's longevity insurance. It's the one check that does not stop, does not drop when markets fall, and does not run out if you live to 90. Claiming early locks in a lower floor, permanently, and that gap, $1,080 a month, compounds over time. At 80, that's roughly $130,000 in additional lifetime income Mark left behind. At 85, closer to $195,000. The math is straightforward. But 9 out of 10 Americans still say no to that 77% increase. And the reason isn't that they can't do arithmetic. The reason is that the advice they've been given is missing a variable, one that quietly sits inside their 401k and waits. So Mark decides to wait. He's 62. He's done the math. And he believes the $2,480 at 70 is worth holding out for. That's a reasonable conclusion. But here's what the spreadsheet didn't model. Mark still has to eat. He still has a mortgage payment, utilities, maybe a car note. Life doesn't pause for 8 years while he waits for the bigger check. So he does what a lot of people in his position do. He starts pulling from his 401k. His account sits at $350,000. Not a small number, but not an infinite one either. To cover his living expenses while he waits, he needs to withdraw roughly $38,000 to $42,000 a year. That's an 11% to 12% annual withdrawal rate. The standard guidance for a sustainable retirement withdrawal is around 4%. Mark is drawing at nearly triple that pace. Now, if the market cooperates, if the first few years of his retirement look like 2019 or 2023, he probably makes it to 70 with his portfolio intact. Bruised, but intact. But if the market drops in year 1 or year 2 of his retirement, the math changes fast. A 25% market decline on a $350,000 portfolio brings it down to around $262,000. Then Mark still needs to pull $40,000 to live. Now he's at $222,000. The market recovers the following year, but he's recovering from a much smaller base. By the time he's 68, his portfolio could be under $150,000 before he's collected a single dollar from that delayed Social Security check. This is called sequence of returns risk. It's not about average market performance. It's about when the bad years hit. And retiring into a down market while drawing heavily from your portfolio is one of the most financially dangerous positions a person can be in. I've watched people go through this. 2022 was a real test. Bonds and stocks fell together. And people who were counting on that portfolio bridge to carry them to 70 were suddenly staring at numbers they didn't expect. That feeling, checking your account balance and watching it drop while you're trying to hold out for a bigger benefit, that's not something any retirement brochure prepares you for. Delaying Social Security can protect you against the risk of living a long time. That part is real. But it can also put direct pressure on the one pool of money you have right now at exactly the moment when that money is most vulnerable to a bad sequence of returns. That's the trade-off the 8% growth number doesn't show you. And it still isn't the biggest problem with the wait until 70 strategy. That one involves the IRS. Meet Sarah. Sarah did everything right. She saved consistently. She has a 401k with around $480,000 in it. And she followed the advice to delay Social Security until 70. Her financial plan looked clean on paper. Then she retired at 63 and started paying her bills. With no Social Security income coming in yet, she began pulling from her 401k, around $45,000 a year, enough to cover her mortgage, insurance, and basic living. Reasonable, responsible, even. What she didn't realize is that every dollar she pulled from that traditional 401k was about to cause a problem she never saw coming. Not just for her income tax bill, but for the Social Security benefit she hadn't even started collecting yet. This is called the Provisional Income Trap. Here's how it works. The IRS doesn't just tax your Social Security benefit as regular income. It first calculates something called your provisional income, which is your adjusted gross income, plus any tax-exempt interest, plus half of your Social Security benefit. If that combined number crosses certain thresholds, a portion of your Social Security becomes taxable. The thresholds are $25,000 for single filers and $32,000 for married couples filing jointly, where up to 50% of your benefit gets taxed. Cross $34,000 single or $44,000 married, and now up to 85% of your Social Security benefit is subject to federal income tax. So for Sarah, she's pulling $45,000 from her 401k. That alone already pushes her past the upper threshold before she's received a single Social Security check. When she eventually starts collecting at 70, up to 85% of that larger benefit will be taxable. The 8% annual growth she waited 8 years for gets quietly handed back to the IRS. And here's the part that should make you pause. Those thresholds, $34,000 and $44,000, have not changed since 1984. They were set during the Reagan administration and were never indexed for inflation. What was a high income in 1984 is a modest retirement income today, which means more and more middle-income retirees are walking straight into this trap without knowing it exists. It's not a loophole. It's not a technicality. It's a structural feature of the tax code that nobody explains until after the damage is done. So when someone runs the numbers on delaying Social Security and shows you the 8% growth, ask them one question. Did you account for provisional income? Because if the answer is no, that 8% annual gain could shrink to 4% or less once the tax math settles. The strategy that was supposed to protect you is funding the government's retirement, not yours. Now, there's another group of people who hear all of this and say, forget waiting. I'll claim at 62 and invest every dollar in the S&P 500 myself. On paper, that sounds sharp. In real life, it almost never works the way people think it will. The logic sounds solid. Claim Social Security at 62, pocket $1,400 a month, and put every dollar straight into an S&P 500 index fund. Over 8 years, with average market returns, the math on paper actually works out close to even or sometimes ahead. Some calculators will even tell you it's the smarter move. The problem isn't the math. The problem is the assumption hiding inside it. That assumption is that you will invest every dollar, consistently, automatically, for 8 straight years, without touching it. I'll be honest about something. Early in my career, I genuinely believed most people could pull this off. You give someone a predictable monthly check and a clear investment goal, and discipline takes care of the rest. That's what the model assumes. That's what I assumed. What I actually watched happen was different. The first check arrives, and it feels like a reward. Because it is. You worked for decades to get here. So maybe there's a trip that got postponed, a kitchen that needed updating, a car that was running on borrowed time. None of those things are wasteful. All of them are reasonable. And every single one of them is exactly what lifestyle creep looks like in real time. Research consistently shows that people spend more when they have reliable cash flow. It's not a character flaw. It's how humans respond to money that feels like income rather than savings. When $1,400 hits your account every month, your brain files it under available, not invested. SSA data suggests that the vast majority of early claimers do not systematically reinvest their benefits. They spend them. which means the invest it yourself strategy works beautifully in Excel and almost nowhere else. And here's the real cost of that. The S&P 500 argument only holds if you actually capture those returns. If you spend the money instead, even partially, even reasonably, you've given up the guaranteed 8% annual growth, the inflation adjustments, and the longevity protection of a higher benefit, in exchange for a lifestyle that felt comfortable at 62, but left you with a lower income floor at 82. Wanting to enjoy your retirement when you first reach it is not a mistake. You earned that. The problem is when a financial strategy requires a level of behavioral discipline that almost nobody sustains for 8 years, and nobody tells you that up front. Discipline at 62, when the money is new and the possibilities feel open, is genuinely difficult. Not because people are careless, because being human is expensive. So if that tax math breaks the wait until 70 strategy for middle-income households, and the behavioral math breaks the invest it yourself strategy for almost everyone else, what actually works? To understand why this advice keeps getting recycled, it helps to know where it came from. In 1983, President Reagan signed the Social Security amendments into law. That legislation did two things that still shape the decisions you're making today. It gradually raised the full retirement age from 65 to 67. And it introduced federal income taxes on Social Security benefits for the first time, which is where those provisional income thresholds we talked about came from. Here's the context that gets left out. In 1983, the average 30-year Treasury bond was yielding around 10% to 11%. A retiree who claimed Social Security early and put the money in a safe, government-backed bond could genuinely outpace inflation without much risk. The claim early and invest it math actually worked in that environment because safe money still grew. Today, that same Treasury bond yields somewhere around 4% to 5%. The math is different. The incentive structure is different. But the advice stayed the same. Then there's the longevity question. The SSA's own actuarial tables put the average life expectancy for American men at roughly 73 to 76 years. For women, it's higher, closer to 78 to 80. And the break-even point for delaying Social Security, the age at which the larger benefit finally overtakes what you would have collected by claiming early, typically falls somewhere between 77 and 82, depending on your situation. Do the math on that. If the average man lives to 75 and the break-even is 79, the wait until 70 strategy doesn't pay off for the average male retiree. It pays off for the ones who live longer than average, which may or may not be you. That's not pessimism. That's just what the actuarial data says. The system was designed with a specific assumption about lifespan, a specific interest rate environment, and a specific tax structure. All three of those have shifted meaningfully since 1983. The advice, for the most part, has not. Social Security wasn't built to hand you a windfall. It was built to roughly break even across a population. Some people collect more, some collect less, and the math balances out at the aggregate level. The government doesn't lose on this, which means winning isn't about finding the biggest number. It's about understanding how the rules actually apply to your specific income, your specific tax situation, and your specific timeline. And that's exactly what the next part is about. None of this means the decision is impossible. It means the decision needs to be made with the right variables, not just the ones that fit on a bumper sticker. Here are 3 strategies that actually hold up when you stress test them against real tax situations and real market conditions. The first one is what I call the bridge to 65. If you want to retire before Social Security kicks in, The single most overlooked problem isn't income, it's health insurance. Medicare doesn't start until 65. And if you retire at 62 without coverage through a spouse or a former employer, you're buying insurance on the open market. For a 62-year-old, that can run $800 to $1,200 a month or more before subsidies. The ACA marketplace offers income-based subsidies that can dramatically reduce that cost, but only if your income stays below certain thresholds, which means how you draw down your retirement accounts in those years between 62 and 65 isn't just a tax question. It's a healthcare cost question. Getting that sequencing right can save you $20,000 to $30,000 or more before you ever touch a Social Security decision. The second strategy is the Roth Conversion Ladder. This is the most direct fix for the provisional income trap we talked about earlier. The idea is straightforward. In the years before you start collecting Social Security, you gradually convert money from your traditional IRA or 401k into a Roth account. You pay the taxes now at what is likely your lowest income tax rate in retirement, and in exchange, future withdrawals from that Roth are tax-free, which means they don't count towards your provisional income calculation. Done correctly, this can reduce the percentage of your Social Security benefit that gets taxed from 85% down to 0. That's not a small adjustment. On a $2,480 monthly benefit, the difference between 85% taxable and 0% taxable can be worth $6,000 to $10,000 a year in after-tax income. If you want me to go deeper on exactly how to structure a Roth conversion in the years before claiming, the timing, the amounts, the tax brackets to target, drop Roth in the comments. If enough people are interested, I'll put together a full video on the mechanics. The third strategy is split claiming for couples. This one gets almost no attention, but it's often the highest value move for married households. The lower earning spouse claims at 62 or at full retirement age, bringing in steady income while the household adjusts to retirement. The higher earning spouse delays until 70. Why does this matter? Because when the higher earner dies first, the surviving spouse steps up to that larger benefit permanently. The survivor benefit is based on what the higher earner was collecting. Delaying that one benefit, and only that one, can mean the difference of $400 to $700 more per month for a surviving spouse for the rest of their life. You don't have to optimize everything, but optimizing that one decision for the right person in the household is one of the highest return moves available in retirement planning. One more thing before we close. You might be thinking, I'm already past 62, or I've already claimed, or I waited too long to think about this. That's worth addressing directly. A change in how you sequence your withdrawals this year, which accounts you pull from, in what order, at what income level, can still meaningfully reduce your tax exposure over the next decade. The Roth conversion window doesn't close when you start Social Security. And if you claimed early, but your health and finances have shifted, there are limited circumstances where you can withdraw your application within the first 12 months and restart the clock. The point isn't that you're behind. The point is that the next decision still matters. Here's the honest version of what we covered today. Claiming Social Security early isn't reckless. Waiting until 70 isn't automatically wise. The right answer sits somewhere in the middle of your tax situation, your portfolio balance, your health, and your household's structure. Anyone who gives you a single rule that applies to everyone is selling you simplicity at the cost of accuracy. The 90% of Americans who don't wait until 70 aren't making a math error. Most of them are making a human decision. They need the income, they're not sure how long they'll live, or they just want some financial breathing room after decades of working. That's not ignorance, that's life. But the 10% who do wait aren't automatically winning either. Not if they're drawing down a $350,000 portfolio at 12% a year to get there. Not if their provisional income is quietly pushing 85% of their future benefit into a taxable bucket. Not if the break-even math assumes a lifespan that actuarial data says is longer than average. This morning, I was going back through the updated IRS guidelines for 2026, and something stayed with me. The provisional income thresholds, the ones that determine how much of your Social Security gets taxed, are still sitting at the same numbers they were set at in 1984. More than 40 years later, not adjusted for inflation, not updated for the fact that a middle-income retirement today looks nothing like a middle-income retirement in the Reagan era. The system hasn't changed, the world has. And the gap between those two things is where most of the planning mistakes happen. Real financial freedom in retirement doesn't come from finding the biggest check. It comes from understanding exactly how the rules apply to your income, your accounts, and your timeline, and then making decisions that let you sleep at night without worrying about what the market does in January or what your tax bill looks like in April. 90% of Americans are doing something different from what the experts recommend. That doesn't make them wrong. It makes them human. The goal isn't to follow the crowd or to rebel against it. The goal is to know enough to make the call yourself. If this video helped you see one piece of this more clearly, subscribe so you don't miss what's coming next. There's a lot more of the tax code to unpack, and most of it is working against you in ways that don't show up until it's too late to fix them. See you in the next one.